Thank you for the pets, son. Thank you for the pets. Also, thank you for the resubscription. How's it going, y'all? I know it's either probably really late or really early for everybody. Throwing the biscuits on me is crazy. Alright, guys, I have decided, I don't really have a great throat voice for ASMR quite yet, as that takes a lot of practice without me dying when I read. So I am going to be reading in a very quiet voice, but not as low as that is deemed like very ASMR low, as one would say. So we're gonna make it still very cozy and speak very gently as I read. We're gonna go ahead and continue our series of The Last Apprentice with Joseph Delaney. And this is usually a part of the chapter where things get really good, so I apologize if I miss any chats, as your girl is gonna be nose deep inside of a book. There's a trigger for soft talking? Well, either way, I feel like everybody would really want to hear the story. Well, thanks, son. Thanks for stopping by. Thank you for the resubscription. I hope you have a good eep. Alright, guys. We're gonna go ahead and get started. What chapter is this? I'm not gonna lie, your girl is very poor at recognizing Roman numerals for chapters, so this is from chapter 3. That's 4. You know what? I'm not gonna read in too much of it. Whoa, Silver with the 60 streak. Thank you for always stopping by, Silver, and supporting me. Story, please. Alright, I'll go ahead and get started. Alright, we're on the chapter about poor Billy. I was so weak afterward that I fell to my knees, and within moments I was sick, sicker than I'd ever been before. I kept heaving and heaving, even when there was nothing but bile coming out of my mouth, heaving until my insides felt torn and twisted. At last it ended, and I managed to stand. Even then, it was a long time before my breathing slowed down and my body stopped trembling. I just wanted to go back to the Spook's house. I'd done enough for one night, surely, but I couldn't. The child was in Lizzie's house. That was what my instincts told me. The child was the prisoner of a witch who was capable of murder. So I had no choice. There was nobody else but me. And if I didn't help, then who would? I had to set off for Boney Lizzie's house. There was a storm surging in from the west, a dark, jagged line of cloud that was eating into the stars. Very soon now it would begin to rain. But as I started down the hill toward the house, the moon was still out. A full moon, bigger than I ever remembered it. It was casting my shadow before me as I went. I watched it grow, and the nearer I got to the house, the bigger it seemed to get. I had my hood up and I was carrying the Spook's staff in my left hand so that the shadow didn't seem to belong to me anymore. It moved on ahead of me until it fell upon Boney Lizzie's house. I glanced backward then, half expecting to see the Spook standing behind me. He wasn't there. It was just a trick of the light, so I went on until I passed through the open gate into the yard. I passed before the front door to think. What if I was too late and the child was already dead? Or what if its disappearance was nothing to do with Lizzie and I was just putting myself in danger for nothing? My mind carried on thinking, but just as it had on the riverbank, my body knew what to do. Before I could stop it, my left hand rapped the staff hard against the wood 3 times. For a few moments there was silence, followed by the sound of footsteps and a sudden crack of light under the door. As the door slowly swung open, I took a step backward. To my relief, it was Alice. She was holding a lantern level with her head, so that one half of her face was lit while the other was in darkness. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice filled with anger. "You know what I want," I replied. "I've come for the child that you've stolen." "Don't be a fool," she said. "Go away before it's too late. They've gone off to meet Mother Malkin. They could be back any minute." Suddenly, a child began to cry, a thin wail coming from somewhere inside the house. So I pushed past Alice and went inside. "Hi, Stress. Welcome in, baby girl." There was just a single candle flickering in the narrow passageway, but the rooms themselves were in darkness. The candle was unusual. I'd never seen one made of black wax before, but I snatched it up anyway, and I let my ears guide me to the right room. I eased open the door. The room was empty of furniture, and the child was lying on the floor on a heap of straw and rags. "What's your name?" I asked, trying my best to smile. I leaned my staff against the wall and moved closer. The child stopped crying and tottered to its feet, its eyes very wide. "Don't worry. There's no need to be scared," I said, trying to put as much reassurance into the voice as possible. "I'm going to take you home to your ma'am." I put the candle on the floor and picked up the child. It smelled as bad as the rest of the room, and it was cold and wet. I cradled it with my right arm, and I wrapped my cloak about it as best I could. Suddenly the child spoke. "I'm Tommy," it said. "I'm Tommy." "Well, Tommy," I said, "we've got the same name. My name's Tommy, too. You're safe now. You're going home." With those words, I picked up my staff and went to the passageway and out through the front door. Alice was standing in the yard near the gate. The lantern had gone out, but the moon was still shining. And as I walked nearer, it threw my shadow into the side of the barn. A giant shadow 10 times bigger than I was. I tried to pass her, but she stepped directly into my path so that I was forced to halt. "Don't meddle," she warned, her voice almost a snarl, her teeth gleaming white and sharp in the moonlight. "Ain't none of your business, this." I was in no mood to waste time arguing with her, and when I moved directly toward her, Alice didn't try to stop me. She stepped back out of my way and called out after me, "You're a fool. Give it back before it's too late. They'll come after you. You'll never get away." I didn't bother to answer. I never even looked back. I went through the gate and began to climb away from the house. It started to rain then, hard and heavy, straight into my face. It was the kind of rain that my dad used to call wet rain. All rain is wet, of course, but some kinds do seem to make it better and a faster job of soaking you than others. This was as wet as it got, and I headed back toward the Spook's house as fast as I could. I wasn't sure if I'd be safe even there. What if the Spook really was dead? Would the Boogart still guard his house and garden? Soon I had more immediate things to worry about. I began to sense that I was being followed. The first time I felt it, I came to a halt and listened, but there was nothing but the howling of the wind and the rain lashing into the trees and drumming onto the earth. I couldn't see much either, because it was very dark now. So I carried on, taking even bigger strides, just hoping that I was still heading in the right direction. Once I came up against a thick, high hawthorn hedge and had to make a long detour to find a gate, all the time feeling that the danger behind was getting closer. It was just after I come through a small wood that I knew for certain that there was someone there. Climbing a hill, I paused for a breath close to its summit. The rain had eased for a moment, and I looked back down into the darkness, toward the trees. I heard the crack and snap of twigs. Someone was moving very fast through the wood in my direction, not caring where he put his feet. At the crest of the hill, I looked back once more. The first flash of lightning lit up the sky and the ground below, and I saw two figures come out of the trees and begin to climb the slope. One of them was female, the other shaped like a man, big and burly. When the thunder crashed again, Tommy began to cry. "Don't like thunder," he wailed. "Don't like thunder." "Storms can't hurt you, Tommy," I told him, knowing it wasn't true. They scared me as well. One of my uncles had been struck by lightning when he'd been out trying to get some cattle in. He died later. It wasn't safe being out in the open in weather like this. But although lightning terrified me, it did have its uses. It was showing me the way, each vivid flash lightening up my route back to the spook's house. Soon the breath was sobbing in my throat, too, a mixture of fear and exhaustion. As I forced myself to go faster and faster, just hoping that we'd be safe as soon as we entered the spook's garden. Nobody was allowed on the spook's property unless invited. I kept telling myself that over and over again, because it was our only chance. If we could just get there first, the boogart will protect us. I was in the sight of the trees, the bench beneath them, the garden waiting beyond, when I slipped on the wet grass. The fall wasn't hard, but Tommy began to cry even louder. When I managed to pick him up, I heard someone running behind me, feet thumping the earth. I glanced back, struggling for breath. It was a mistake. My pursuer was about 5 or 6 paces ahead of Lizzie and catching me fast. Lightning flashed again, and I saw the lower half of his body. It looked as if he had horns growing out of each side of his mouth, and as he ran, he moved his head from side to side. I remembered what I read in the Spook's library about the dead woman who'd been found with her ribs crushed. If Tusk caught me, he'd do the same to me. For a moment I was rooted to the spot, but he started to make a bellowing sound, just like a bull, and that started me moving again. I was almost running now. I would have sprinted if I could, but I was carrying Tommy, and I was too wary, my legs heavy and sluggish, the breath rasping in my throat. At any moment I expected to be grabbed from behind, but I passed the bench where the Spook often gave me lessons, and then, at last, I was beneath the first trees of the garden. But was I safe? If I wasn't, it was all over for both of us, because there's no way I could outrun Tusk to the house. I stopped running, and all I could manage was a few steps before I came to a complete halt, trying to regain my breath. It was at that moment that something brushed past my legs. I looked down, but it was too dark to see anything. First I felt the pressure. Then I heard something purr, a deep throbbing sound that made the ground beneath my feet vibrate. I sensed it move on beyond me, toward the edges of the trees, positioning itself between us and those who had been following. I couldn't hear any running now, but I heard something else. Imagine the angry howl of a tomcat multiplied 100 times. It was a mixture between a throbbing growl and a scream, filling the air with its warning challenge, a sound that could have been heard for miles. It was the most terrifying and threatening sound I have ever heard, and I knew then why the villagers never came anywhere near the spook's house. That cry was filled with death. "Cross this line," it said, "and I'll rip your heart out. Cross this line, and I'll gnaw your bones to pulp and gore. Cross this line, and you'll wish you'd never been born." So for now, we were safe. By now, bony Lizzie and Tusk would be running back down the hill. Nobody would be foolish enough to tangle with the spookart. No wonder they needed me to feed Mother Malkin the blood cakes. There was a hot soup and a blazing fire waiting for us in the kitchen. I wrapped little Tommy in a warm blanket and I fed him some soup. Later, I brought down a couple of pillows and made up a bed for him close to the fire. He slept like a log while I listened to the wind howling outside and the rain pattering against the windows. It was a long night, but I was warm and comfortable, and I felt at peace in the spook's house, which was one of the safest places in the whole wide world. I knew now that nothing unwelcome could even enter the garden. Never mind cross the threshold. It was safer than a castle with high battlements and a wide moat. I began to think of the boogart as my friend, and a very powerful friend at that. Just before noon, I carried Tommy down to the village. The men were already back from the long ridge, and when I went to the butcher's house, the instant he saw the child, his wary frown turned into a broad smile. I briefly explained what had happened, only going into as much detail as was necessary. Once I'd finished, he frowned again. "They need sorting at once and for all," he said. I didn't stay long. After Tommy had been given to his mother and she thanked me for the 15th time, it became obvious what was going to happen. By then, about 30 or so of the village men had gathered. Some of them were carrying clubs and stout sticks, and they were muttering angrily about stoning and burning. I knew that something had to be done, but I didn't want to be a part of it. Despite all that had happened, I couldn't stand the thought of Alice being hurt, so I went for a walk on the fells for an hour or so to clear my head, and before walking slowly back toward the spook's house. I decided to sit on the bench for a while and enjoy the afternoon sun, but someone was there already. It was the spook. He was safe after all. Until that moment, I'd avoided thinking about what I was going to do next. I mean, how long would I have stayed in this house before deciding that he wasn't going to come back? Now it was all sorted out because there he was, staring across the trees to where a plume of brown smoke was rising. They were burning Bony Lizzie's house. When I got close to the bench, I noticed a big purple bruise over his left eye. He saw me glance at it and gave me a tired smile. "We make a lot of enemies in this job," he said. "And sometimes you need eyes in the back of your head. Still, things didn't work out too badly because now we've one less enemy to worry about near Pendle." "Take a pew," he said, patting the bench at his side. "What have you been up to? Tell me what's been happening here. Start at the beginning and finish at the end, leaving nothing out." So I did. I told him everything. When I'd finished, he stood up and looked down at me, his green eyes staring into mine very hard. "I wish I'd known Lizzie was back. When I put Mother Malkin into the pit, Lizzie left in a bit of a hurry, and I didn't think she'd ever have the nerve to show her face again. You should have told me about meeting the girl. It would have saved everybody a lot of trouble. I looked down, unable to meet his eyes. What was the worst thing that happened? He asked. The memory came back, sharp and clear, of the old witch grabbing my boot and trying to drag herself out of the water. I remembered her scream as she gripped the end of the spook's staff. When I told him about it, he sighed long and deep. Are you sure she was dead? He asked. I shrugged. She wasn't breathing. Then her body was carried to the middle of the river and swept away. Well, it was a bad business, all right, he said, and the memory of it will stay with you for the rest of your life. But you'll just have to live with it. You were lucky in taking the smallest of my staffs with you. That's what saved you in the end. It's made of rowan, the most effective wood of all when dealing with witches. It wouldn't usually have bothered a witch that old and that strong, but she was in running water. So you were lucky that you did all right for a new apprentice. You showed courage, real courage, and you saved a child's life, but you made 2 more serious mistakes. I bowed my head. I thought I probably made more than 2, but I wasn't going to argue. Your most serious mistake was in killing that witch, the spook said. She would have been brought back here. Mother Malkin is so strong that she could even break free of her bones. It's very rare, but it can happen. Her spirit could be born into this world again, complete with all her memories. Then she'd come looking for you, lad, and she wanted revenge. That would take years though, wouldn't it? I asked. A newborn baby can't do much. She'd have to grow up first. That's the worst part of it, the spook said. It could happen sooner than you think. Her spirit could seize someone else's body and use it as her own. It's called possession, and it's as bad business for everybody concerned. After that, you'll never know when and from which direction the danger will come. She might possess the body of a young woman, a lass with a dazzling smile, who will win your heart before she takes your life. Or she might use her beauty to bend some strong men to her will. A knight or a judge who will have you thrown into a dungeon where you'll be at her mercy. Then again, time will be on her side. She might attack when I'm not here to help. Maybe years from now, when you're long past your prime, when your eyesight's failing and your joints are starting to creak. But there's another type of possession, one that's more likely in this case. Much more likely. You see, lad, there's a problem with keeping a live witch in a pit like that, especially one so powerful who spent her long life practicing blood magic. She'll have been eating worms and other slithery things, with the wet constantly soaking into her flesh. So in the same way that a tree can slowly be petrified and turned into rock, her body will have been slowly starting to change. Gripping the rowan staff would have stopped her heart, pushing her over the barrier into death, and being washed away by the river might have speeded up the process. In this case, she'll still be bound to her bones, like most other malevolent witches, but because of her great strength, she'll be able to move her dead body. You see, lad, she'll be what we call wick. It's an old county word that you're no doubt familiar with. Just as the head of hair can be wick with lice, her dead body is now wick with her wicked spirit. It'll be heaving like a bowl of maggots, and she'll crawl, slither, or drag herself toward her chosen victim. And instead of being hard, like a petrified tree, her dead body will be soft and pliable, able to squeeze into the tiniest space, able to ooze up someone's nose or into his ear and possess his body. There are only two ways to make sure that a witch as powerful as Mother Malkin can't come back. The first is to burn her, but nobody should have to suffer pain like that. The other way is too horrible even to think about. It's a method few have heard about because it was practiced long ago in a land far away over the sea. According to their ancient books, if you eat the heart of a witch, she can never return, and you have to eat it raw. If we practice either method, we're no better than the witch we kill, said the spook. Both are barbaric. The only alternative left is the pit. That's cruel as well, but we do it to protect the innocents, those who'd be her future victims. Well, lad, one way or the other, now she's free. There's trouble ahead for sure, but there's little we can do about it now. We'll just have to be on our guard. I'll be all right, I said. I'll manage somehow. Well, you better start by learning how to manage a boogart, the spook said, shaking his head sadly. That was your other big mistake. A whole Sunday off every week? That's far too generous. Anyway, what should we do about that? He asked, gesturing toward the thin plume of smoke that was still just visible to the southeast. I shrugged. I suppose it'll be all over by now, I said. There were a lot of angry villagers, and they were all talking about stoning. All over with? Don't you believe it, lad. A witch like Lizzie has a sense of smell better than any hunting dog. She can sniff out things before they happen, and would have been gone long before anyone got near. No, she'll have fled back to Pendle, where most of the Broad live. We should follow now, but I've been on the road for days, and I'm too weary and sore, and need to gather my strength. But we can't leave Lizzie free for too long, or she'll start to work her mischief again. I'll have to go after her before the end of the week, and you'll be coming with me. It won't be easy, but you might as well get used to the idea. But first things first, so follow me. As I followed, I noticed that he had a slight limp and was walking more slowly than usual. So whatever had happened in Pendle, it hadn't been without a cost to himself. He led me into the house, up the stairs, and into the library, halting beside the farthest shelves, the ones near the window. I like to keep my books in my library, he said, and I like my library to get bigger rather than smaller. But because of what's happened, I'm going to make an exception. Hi, Sprat. Welcome in. He reached up and took a book from the very top shelf and handed it to me. You need this more than I do, he said. A lot more. As books went, it wasn't very big. It was even smaller than my notebook. Like most of the Spook's books, it was bound in leather and had its title printed both on the front cover and on the spine. It said, Possession, the Damned, the Dizzy, and the Desperate. What does the title mean? I asked. What it says, lad. Exactly what it says. Read the book and you'll find out. When I opened the book, I was disappointed. Inside every word on every page was printed in Latin, a language I couldn't read. Study it well and carry it with you at all times, said the spook. It's the definitive work. He must have seen me frowning because he smiled and jabbed at the book with his finger. Definitive means that so far it's the best book that's ever been written about possession. But it's a very difficult subject, and it was written by a young man who still had a lot to learn. So it's not the last word on the subject, and there's more to discover. Turn to the back of the book. I did as he told me, and found that the last 10 or so pages were blank. If you find anything new, then just write it down there. Every little bit helps. And don't worry about the fact that it's in Latin. I'll be starting your lessons as soon as we've eaten. We went for our afternoon meal, which was cooked almost to perfection. As I swallowed down my last mouthful, something moved under the table and began to rub itself against my legs. Suddenly, the sound of purring could be heard. It gradually got louder and louder until all the plates and dishes on the sideboard began to rattle. "Welcome in, Mari, welcome in." "No wonder it's happy," said the spook, shaking his head. "One day off a year would have been nearer than the mark. Still, not to worry. It's business as usual, and life goes on. Bring your notebook with you, lad. We have a lot to get through today." So I followed the spook down the path to the bench, uncorked the bottle of ink, dipped in my pen, and prepared to take notes. "Once they've passed the test in Horseshaw," said the spook, starting to limp up and down in front of the bench. "I usually try to ease my apprentices into the job as gently as possible. But now that you've been face to face with a witch, you know how difficult and dangerous the job can be. And I think you're ready to find out what happened to my last apprentice. It's linked to Bogarts, the topic we've been studying, so you might as well learn from it. Find a clean page and write down this for a heading." I did as I was told. I wrote down how to bind a Bogart. Then, as the spook told the tale, I took notes, struggling to keep up as usual. As I already knew, binding a Bogart involved a lot of hard work, which the spook called laying. First, a pit had to be dug as close as possible to the roots of a large mature tree. After all the digging the spook had made me do, I was surprised to learn that the spook rarely dug the pit himself. That was something only done in absolute emergency. A rigger and his helper usually attended to it. Next, you had to employ a mason to cut a thick slab of stone to fit over the pit like a gravestone. It was very important that the stone be cut to size accurately, so as to make a good seal. After you coated the lower edge of the stone and the inside of the pit with a mixture of iron, salt, and strong glue, it was time to get the Bogart safely inside. That wasn't too difficult. Blood, milk, or any combination of the two worked every time. The really difficult bit was dropping the stone into position as it fed. Success depended on the quality of the help you hired. It was best to have a mason standing by and a couple of riggers using chains controlled from a wooden gantry placed above the pit, so as to lower the stone down quickly and safely. That was the mistake that Billy Bradley made. It was late winter and the weather was foul, and Billy was in a rush to get back to his warm bed, so he cut corners. He used local laborers who hadn't done that type of work before. The mason had gone off for his supper, promising to return within the hour, but Billy was impatient and couldn't wait. He got the Bogart into the pit without too much trouble, but he ran into difficulties with the slab of stone. It was a wet night, and it slipped, trapping his left hand under its edge. The chain jammed so they couldn't lift the stone, and while the laborers struggled with it, and one of them ran back to get the mason, the Bogart, in its fury at being trapped under the stone, began to attack Billy's fingers. You see, it was one of the most dangerous Bogarts of all, cattle rippers, that had got the taste of human blood. By the time the stone was lifted, almost half an hour had passed, and by then, it was too late. The Bogart had bitten off Billy's fingers as far down as the second knuckle and had been busily sucking the blood from his body. Billy's screams of pain had faded away to a whimper, and when they got his hand free, only his thumb was left. Soon afterward, he died of shock and loss of blood. It was a sad business, said the spook, and now he's buried under the hedge, just outside the churchyard at Leighton. Those who follow our trade don't get to rest their bones in hallowed ground. It happened just over a year ago, and if Billy had lived, I wouldn't be taking you on, because he'd still be my apprentice. Poor Billy. He was a good lad, and he didn't deserve that. But it's a dangerous job, and if it's not done right, the spook looked at me sadly, then shrugged. Learn from it, lad. We need courage and patience above all. We never rush. We use our brains. We think carefully. Then we do what has to be done. In the normal course of events, I never send an apprentice out on his own until his first year of training is over. Unless, of course, he added with a faint smile, he takes matters into his own hands. Then again, I've got to feel sure he's ready for it. Anyway, now it's time for your first Latin lesson. And that completes our chapter of Poor Billy. Alright, you guys. If any of you kind of want to take a short little break and get some drinks, a snack, I'm going to be sipping on my coffee a little bit and train my throat, and I'll be right back. Take this moment to take a little break, and we'll get on with the next chapter called The Pit. I'm back, guys. Seem to be running into a technical issue because my magic book decided it was gonna close, and I don't even know how I did that. I kind of like that actually. Okay, I just figured it out. Alright, that was a pretty long little break we had. So let me go ahead, continue on to our next chapter. After a little sip of coffee. Alright. Figured out also what chapter we're on. We are on chapter 11, The Pit. It happened just 3 days later. The Spook had sent me down into the village to collect the week's groceries. It was very late in the afternoon, and as I left his house carrying the empty sack, the shadows were already beginning to lengthen. As I approached the stile, I saw someone standing right on the edge of the trees near the top of the narrow lane. When I realized that it was Alice, my heart lurched into a more rapid beat. What was she doing here? Why hadn't she gone off to Pendle? And if she was still here, what about Lizzie? I slowed down, but I had to pass her to get to the village. I could have gone back and taken a longer route, but I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of thinking I was scared of her. Even so, once I'd climbed over the stile, I stayed on the left-hand side of the lane, keeping close to the high hawthorn hedge, right on the edge of the deep ditch that ran along its length. Alice was standing in the gloom, with just the toes of her pointy shoes poking out into the sunlight. She beckoned me closer, but I kept my distance, staying a good 3 paces away. After all that had happened, I didn't trust her one little bit, but I was still glad that she hadn't been burned or stoned. "I've come to say goodbye," Alice said, "and warn you never to go walking near Pendle. That's where we're going. Lizzie has family living there." "I'm glad you escaped," I said, coming to a halt and turning to face directly toward her. "I watched the smoke when they burned your house down." "Lizzie knew they were coming," Alice said, "so we got away with plenty of time to spare. Didn't sniff you out, though, did she? Knows what you did to Mother Malcolm, but only found out after it happened. Didn't sniff you out at all, and that worries her. And she said your shadow had a funny smell." I laughed out loud at that. I mean, it was crazy. How could a shadow have a smell? "Ain't funny," Alice accused. "Ain't nothing to laugh at. She only smelled your shadow where it had fallen on the barn. I actually saw it, and it was all wrong. The moon showed the truth of you." Suddenly she took 2 steps nearer into the sunlight, then leaned forward a little and sniffed at me. "You do smell funny," she said, wrinkling up her nose. She stepped backward quickly and suddenly looked afraid. I smiled and put on my friendly voice. "Look," I said. "Don't go to Pendle. You're better off without them. They're just bad company." "Bad company don't matter to me. Won't change me, will it? I'm bad already. Bad inside. You wouldn't believe the things I've been and done." "I'm sorry," she said. "I've been bad again. I'm just not strong enough to say no." Suddenly, too late, I understood the real reason for the fear on Alice's face. It wasn't me she was scared of. It's what was standing right behind me. I'd seen nothing and heard nothing, When I did, it was already too late. Without warning, the empty sack was snatched out of my hand and dropped over my head and shoulders, and everything went dark. Strong hands gripped me, pinning my arms to my sides. I struggled for a few minutes, but it was useless. I was lifted and carried as easily as a farmhand carries a sack of potatoes. While I was being carried, I heard voices. Alice's voice, and then the voice of a woman. I supposed it was Bony Lizzie. The person carrying me just grunted, so it had to be Tusk. Alice had lured me into a trap. It had all been carefully planned. They must have been hiding in the ditch as I came down the hill from the house. I was scared, more scared than I'd ever been in my life before. I mean, I'd killed Mother Malkin, and she'd been Lizzie's grandmother. So what were they going to do to me now? After an hour or so, I was dropped onto the ground so hard that all the air was driven from my lungs. As soon as I could breathe again, I struggled to get free of the sack. But somebody thumped me twice in the back. Thumped me so hard that I kept very still. I'd have done anything to avoid being hit like that again. So I lay there, hardly daring to breathe while the pain slowly faded to a dull ache. They used rope to tie me then, binding it over the sack, around my arms and head, and knotting it tightly. Then Lizzie said something that chilled me to the bone. There. We've got him safe enough. We could start digging now. Her face came very close to mine, so that I could smell her foul breath through the sacking. It was like the breath of a dog or a cat. Well, boy, she said, how does it feel to know that you'll never see the light of day again? When I heard the sound of distant digging, I began to shiver with fright. I remembered the spook's tale of the miner's wife, especially the worst bit of all when she'd laid there paralyzed, unable to cry out while her husband dug her grave. Now it was going to happen to me. I was going to be buried alive, and I'd have done anything just to see daylight again, even for a moment. At first, when they cut my ropes and pulled the sack from me, I was relieved. By then the sun had gone down, but I looked up and could see the stars with the waning moon low over the trees. I felt the wind on my face, and I had never felt so good. My feeling of relief didn't last more than a few moments, though, because I started to wonder exactly what they had in mind for me. I couldn't think of anything worse than being buried alive, but Bony Lizzie probably could. To be honest, when I saw Tusk close up for the first time, he wasn't quite as bad as I expected. In a way, he looked worse the night he was chasing me. He wasn't as old as a Spook, but his face was lined and weather-beaten, and a mass of greasy gray hair covered his head. His teeth were too big to fit into his mouth, which meant that he could never close it properly. The two of them curved upward like yellow tusks on either side of his nose. He was big, too, and very hairy, with powerful muscular arms. I felt that grip and had thought it was bad enough, but I knew he had the power in those shoulders to squeeze me so tightly that all the air would be forced from my body and my ribs would shatter. Tusk had a big curved knife at his belt, with a blade that looked very sharp, but the worst thing about him was his eyes. They were completely dull. It was as if there was nothing alive inside his head. He was just something that obeyed Bony Lizzie without even a thought. I knew that he'd do anything she told him without question, no matter how terrible it was. As for Bony Lizzie, she wasn't skinny at all, and I knew from reading the Spook's library that she was probably called that because she was using bone magic. I already smelled her breath, but at a glance you'd never have taken her for a witch. She wasn't like Mother Malkin, all shriveled with age, looking like nothing or something that was already dead. No, Bony Lizzie was just an older version of Alice, probably no older than 35. She had pretty brown eyes and hair as black as her niece's. She wore a green shawl and a black dress fastened neatly at her slim waist with a narrow leather belt. There was certainly a family resemblance, except for her mouth. It wasn't the shape of it, it was the way she moved it. The way it twisted and sneered when she talked. One other thing I noticed was that she never looked me in the eye. Alice wasn't like that. She had a nice mouth, still shaped for smiling, but I realized that she would eventually become just like Bony Lizzie. Alice had tricked me. She was the reason I was here rather than safe and sound back in the Spook's house, eating my supper. At a nod from Bony Lizzie, Tusk grabbed me and tied my hands behind my back. Then he seized me by the arm and dragged me through the trees. First of all, I saw the mound of dark soil, then the deep pit beside it, and I smelled the wet, loomy stink of freshly turned earth. It smelled sort of dead and alive at the same time, with things brought to the surface that really belonged deep underground. The pit was probably more than 7 feet deep, but unlike the one of the Spook had kept Mother Malkin in, it was irregular in shape, just as a great big hole with steep sides. I remember thinking that with all the practice I'd had, I could have dug one far better. At the moment, the moon showed me something else, something I had preferred not to see. About 3 paces away to the left of the pit, there was an oblong of freshly turned soil. It looked just like a new grave. Without time even to begin worrying about that, I was dragged right to the edge of the pit, and Tusk forced my head back. I had a glimpse of Bony Lizzie's face close to mine. Something hard was jammed into my mouth, and a cold, bitter-tasting liquid was poured down my throat. It tasted vile, and filled my throat and mouth to the brim, spilling over and even erupting out of my nose so that I began to choke. Gasping and struggling for breath, I tried to spit it out, but Bony Lizzie pinched my nostrils hard with her finger and thumb so that in order to breathe, I first had to swallow. That done, Tusk let go of my head and transferred his grip back to my left arm. I saw then what he had been forced into my mouth. Bony Lizzie held it up for me to see. It was a small bottle made of dark glass, a bottle with a long, narrow neck. She turned it so that its neck was pointing to the ground, and a few drops fell to the earth. The rest was already in my stomach. What had I drunk? Had she poisoned me? "That'll keep your eyes wide open, boy," she said with a sneer. "Wouldn't want you dozing off, would we? Wouldn't want you to miss anything." Without warning, Tusk swung me around violently toward the pit, and my stomach lurched as I fell into the space. I landed heavily, but the earth at the bottom was soft, and although the fall winded me, I was unhurt. So I turned to look up at the stars, thinking that maybe I was going to be buried alive after all. But instead of a shovelful of dirt falling toward me, I saw the outline of Bony Lizzie's head and shoulders peering down, a silhouette against the stars. She started to chant in a strange sort of throaty whisper, though I couldn't catch the actual words. Next, she stretched her arms out above the pit, and I could see that she was holding something in each hand. Giving a strange cry, she opened her hands and 2 white things dropped towards me, landing in the mud close to my knees. By the moonlight, I saw clearly what they were. They almost seemed to be glowing. She dropped 2 bones into the pit. They were thumb bones. I could see knuckles. "Enjoy your last night on this earth, boy," she called down to me. "But don't worry, you won't be lonely, because I'll leave you in good company. Dead Billy will be coming to claim his bones. Just next door he is, so he's not got too far to go. He'll be with you soon, and you two have a lot in common. He was old Gregory's last apprentice, and he won't take kindly to you having taken his place. Then just before dawn, we'll be paying you one last visit. We'll be coming to collect your bones. They're special, your bones are. Even better than Billy's. And taken fresh, they'll be the most useful I've had for a long time." Her face drew back, and I heard footsteps walking away. So that's what was going to happen to me. If Lizzie wanted my bones, it meant that she was going to kill me. I remembered the big curved blade that Tusk wore at his belt, and I began to tremble. Before that, I had dead Billy to face. When she said, "just next door," she must have meant the new grave next to the pit. But the spook had said that Billy Bradley was buried just outside the churchyard at Layton. Lizzie must have dug up his body, cut off his thumbs, and buried the rest of him here among the trees. Now he'd be coming to get his thumbs back. Would Billy Bradley want to hurt me? I've never done him any harm, but he probably enjoyed being the spook's apprentice. Maybe he looked forward to finishing his time and becoming the spook himself. Now I'd taken what he once had. Not only that, what about Bony Lizzie's spell? He might think I was the one who'd cut off his thumbs and thrown him into the pit. I managed to kneel up and spent the next few minutes desperately trying to untie my hands. I was hopeless. My struggle seemed to be making the rope even tighter. I felt strange, too, lightheaded and dry-mouthed. When I looked up at the stars, they seemed to be very bright, and each star had a twin. If I concentrated hard, I could make the double stars become a single again. But as soon as I relaxed, they drifted apart. My throat was burning and my heart pounding 3 or 4 times faster than its normal pace. I kept thinking about what Bony Lizzie had said. Dead Billy would be coming to find his bones. Bones that were lying in the mud less than 2 paces from where I was kneeling. If my hands had been free, I'd have hurled those bones from the pit. "Hi, cow. Welcome in." Suddenly, I saw a slight movement to my left. Had I been standing, it would have been just about level with my head. I looked up and watched as a long, plump, white, maggoty head emerged from the side of the pit. It was far, far bigger than any worm I'd have ever seen before. Its blind, bloated head moved in a slow circle as it wrinkled out the rest of its body. What could this be? Was it poisonous? Could it bite? And then it came to me. It was a coffin worm. It must be something that had been living in Billy Bradley's coffin, growing fat and sleek. Something white that had never seen the light of day. I shuddered as the coffin worm wrinkled out of the dark earth and plopped into the mud at my feet. I lost sight of it then as it quickly burrowed beneath the surface. Being so big, the white worm had dislodged quite a bit of soil from the side of the pit, leaving behind a hole like a narrow tunnel. I watched it, horrified but fascinated, because there was something else moving inside. Something disturbing the earth, which was cascading from the hole to form a growing mound of soil. Not knowing what it was made it worse. I had to see what was inside, so I struggled to get to my feet. I staggered, feeling lightheaded again. The stars started to spin. I almost fell, but I managed to take a step, lurching forward so that I was so close to the narrow tunnel, now just about level with my head. When I looked inside, I wish I hadn't. I saw bones. Human bones. Bones that were joined together. Bones that were moving. 2 hands without thumbs. One of them without fingers. Bones squelching in the mud, dragging themselves toward me through the soft earth. A grinning skull with gaping teeth. It was dead Billy, but instead of eyes, his black sockets stared back at me, cavernous and empty. When a white fleshless hand emerged into the moonlight and jerked at my face, I stepped away, nearly falling, sobbing with fear. At that moment, just when I thought I might go out of my mind with terror, the air suddenly became much colder, and I sensed something to my right. Someone else had joined me in the pit. Someone who was standing where it was impossible to stand. Half his body was on view. The rest was embedded in the wall of earth. It was a boy, not much older than me. I could only see his left hand side because the rest of him was somewhere behind, still in the soil. Just as easily as stepping through a door, he swung his right shoulder toward me, and the rest of him entered the pit. He smiled at me, a warm, friendly smile. "The difference between waking and dreaming," he said. "That's one of the hardest lessons to learn. Learn it now, Tom. Learn it now before it's too late." For the first time, I noticed his boots. They looked very expensive and had been crafted from the best quality leather. They were just like the Spook's. He lifted his hands up then, so that they were at each side of his head, palms moving forward. The thumbs were missing from each hand. His left hand was also without fingers. It was the ghost of Billy Bradley. He crossed his hands over his chest and smiled once more. As Billy faded, he seemed happy and at peace. I understood exactly what he told me. No, I wasn't asleep. But in a way, I'd been dreaming. I'd been dreaming the dark dreams that had come out of the bottle that Lizzie had forced into my mouth. When I turned back to look at the hole, it was gone. There never had been a skeleton crawling toward me. Neither had there been a coffin worm. The potion must have been some kind of poison, something that made it difficult to tell the difference between waking and dreaming. That was what Lizzie had given me. It had made my heart beat faster and made it impossible for me to sleep. It had kept my eyes wide open, but it had also made them see things that weren't really there. Soon after the stars disappeared and began to rain heavily, it was a long, uncomfortable, cold night, and I kept thinking about what would happen to me before dawn. The nearer it got, the worse I felt. About an hour before sunrise, the rain eased to a light drizzle before fading away altogether. Once more, I could see the stars, and by now, they no longer seemed double. I was soaked and cold, but my throat had stopped burning. When a face appeared overhead looking down into the pit, my heart began to race because I thought it was Lizzie come to collect my bones. But to my relief, it was Alice. "Lizzie sent me to see how you're getting on," she called down softly. "Has Billy been yet?" "He's been and gone," I told her angrily. "I never meant for this to happen, Tom. If only you hadn't meddled, it would have been all right." "Been all right?" I said. "By now, another child would be dead, and the Spook too. If you had it your way, and those cakes had the blood of a baby inside. Do you call that being all right? You've come from a family of murderers, and you're a murderer yourself. Ain't true. It ain't true that, Alice protested. There was no baby. All I did was give you the cakes. Even if that were so, I insisted. You knew what they were going to do afterward, and you would have let it happen. I ain't that strong, Tom. How could I stop it? How could I stop Lizzie? I've chosen what I want to do, I told her. But what will you choose, Alice? Bone magic or blood magic? Which one? Which one will it be? Ain't going to do either. I don't want to be like them. I'll run away. As soon as I get the chance, I'll be off. If you mean that, then help me now. Help me get out of the pit. We could run away together. It's too dangerous now, Alice said. I'll run away later. Maybe weeks from now, when they ain't expecting it. You mean after I'm dead? When you've got more blood on your hands? Alice didn't reply. I heard her begin to cry softly. But just when I thought she was on the verge of changing her mind and helping me, she walked away. I sat there in the pit, dreading what was going to happen to me, remembering the hanging men and now knowing exactly how they must have felt before they died. I knew that I'd never go home, never see my family again. I'd just about given up all hope when footsteps approached the pit. I came to my feet terrified, but it was Alice again. Oh, Tom, I'm sorry, she said. They're sharpening their knives. The worst moment of all was approaching, and I knew that I only had one chance. The only hope I had was Alice. If you're really sorry, then you'll help me, I said softly. Ain't nothing I can do, she cried. Lizzie could turn on me. She don't trust me, thinks I'm soft. Go and fetch Mr. Gregory, I said. Bring him here. Too late for that, ain't it? Alice sobbed, shaking her head. Bones taken in daylight are no use to Lizzie. No use at all. The best time to take bones is just before the sun comes up. So they'll be coming for you in a few minutes. That's all the time you've got. Then get me a knife, I said. No use that, she said. Too strong, they are. Can't fight 'em, can you? No, I said. I wanted to cut the rope. I'm going to run for it. Suddenly, Alice was gone. She had gone to fetch a knife. Or would she be too scared of Lizzie? I waited a few moments, but when she didn't come back, I became desperate. I struggled, trying to pull my wrists apart, trying to snap the rope, but it was no use. When a face peered down at me, my heart jumped with fear. But it was Alice, holding something out over the pit. She dropped it, and as it fell, metal gleamed in the moonlight. Alice hadn't let me down. It was a knife. If I could just cut the rope, I'd be free. At first, even with my hands tied behind my back, I never had any doubt in my mind that I could do it. The only danger was that I might cut myself a bit, but what did that matter compared to what they'd do to me before the sun came up? It didn't take me long to get a grip on the knife. Positioning it against the rope was more difficult, and it was very hard to move it. When I dropped it for the second time, I began to panic. There couldn't be more than a minute or so before they came for me. You'll have to do it for me, I called up to Alice. Come on, jump down into the pit. I didn't think she'd really do it, but to my surprise, she did. She didn't jump, but lowered herself down feet first. Facing the side of the pit and hanging onto the edge with her arms, When her body was fully extended, she dropped the final 2 feet or so. It didn't take her long to cut the rope. My hands were free, and all we had to do was get out of the pit. "Let me stand on your shoulders," I said. "Then I'll pull you up." Alice didn't argue, and at the second attempt, I managed to balance on her shoulders and drag myself up onto the wet grass. Then came the really hard part, pulling Alice out of the pit. I reached down with my left hand. She gripped it hard with her own and placed her right hand on my wrist for extra support. Then I tried to pull her up. My first problem was the wet, slippery grass, and I found it hard to keep myself from being dragged over the edge. Then I realized that I didn't have the strength to do it. I'd made a big mistake. Just because she was a girl, that didn't necessarily make her weaker than me. Too late, I remembered the way she pulled the rope to make the spook spell dance. She'd done it almost effortlessly. I should have let her stand on my shoulders. I should have let her get out of the pit first. Alice would have pulled me up without any trouble. It was then that I heard the sound of voices. Bony Lizzie and Tusk were coming through the trees towards us. Below me, I saw Alice's feet scrambling against the side of the pit, trying to get a hold. Desperation gave me extra strength. I gave a sudden heave, and she came up over the edge and collapsed beside me. We got away just in time, running hard with the sound of other feet running behind us. They were quite a long way back at first, but very gradually they began to get closer and closer. I don't know how long we ran. I felt like a lifetime. I ran until my legs felt like lead and the breath was burning in my throat. We were heading back towards Chippenden. I could tell that from the occasional glimpses I got from the fells through the trees. We were running toward the dawn. The sky was graying now and growing lighter by the minute. Then, just as I felt I couldn't take another step, the tips of the fells were glowing a pale orange. It was sunlight, and I remember thinking that even if we were caught now, at least it was daylight, and so my bones would be of no use to Lizzie. As we came out of the trees onto the grassy slope and began to run up it, my legs finally began to fail. They were turning to jelly, and Alice started to pull away from me. She glanced back at me, her face terrified. I could still hear them crashing through the trees behind us. Then I came to a complete and sudden halt. I stopped because I wanted to stop. I stopped because there was no need to run any farther. There, standing at the summit of the slope ahead, was a tall figure dressed in black, carrying a long staff. It was the spook. All right, but somehow he looked different. His hood was thrown back, and his hair, lit by the rays of the rising sun, seemed to be streaming back from his head like orange tongues of flame. Tusk gave a sort of a roar and ran up the slope towards him, brandishing his blade, with Bony Lizzie close at his heels. They weren't bothered about us for the moment. They knew who their main enemy was. They could deal with us later. But now, Alice had come to a halt too, so I took a couple of shaky steps to bring myself level with her. We both watched as Tusk made his final charge, lifting his curved blade and bellowing angrily as he ran. The spook had been standing as still as a statue, but then in response, he took 2 big strides down the slope toward him and lifted his staff high. Aiming it like a spear, he drove it hard at Tusk's head. Just before it made contact with his forehead, there was a sort of a click, and a red flame appeared at the very tip. There was a heavy thud as it struck home. The curved knife went up in the air, and Tusk's body fell like a sack of potatoes. I knew he was dead even before he hit the ground. Next, The spook cast his staff to one side and reached inside his cloak. When his left hand appeared again, it was clutching something that he cracked high in the air like a whip. It caught the sun, and I knew it was a silver chain. Bony Lizzie turned and tried to run, but it was too late. The second time he cracked the chain, it was followed almost immediately by a thin, high metallic sound. The chain began to fall, shaping itself into a spiral of fire to bind itself tightly around Bony Lizzie. She gave one great shriek of anguish, then fell to the ground. I walked with Alice to the summit of the slope. There we saw that silver chain was wrapped tightly about the witch from head to toe. It was even tight across her open mouth, hard against her teeth. Her eyes were rolling in her head, and her whole body was twitching with effort, but she couldn't cry out. I glanced across at Tusk. He was lying on his back with his eyes wide open. He was dead, all right, and there was a red wound in the middle of his forehead. I looked at the staff then, wondering about the flame I seen at its tip. My master looked gaunt, tired, and suddenly very old. He kept shaking his head as if he were weary of life itself. In the shadow of the slope, his hair was back to its usual gray color, and I realized why it had seemed to stream back from its head. It was saturated with sweat, and he slicked it back with his hand so that it stuck up and out behind his ears. He did it again as I watched. Beads of sweat were dropping from his brow, and he was breathing very rapidly. I realized he'd been running. "How did you find us?" I asked. It was a while before he answered, but at last his breathing began to slow, and he was able to speak. "There are signs, lad. Trails that can be followed, if you know how. There's something else you'll have to learn." He turned and looked at Alice. "That's two of them dealt with. But what are we going to do about you?" he asked, staring at her hard. "She helped me escape," I said. "Is that so?" asked the spook. "But what else did she do?" He looked hard at me then, and I tried to hold his gaze. When I looked down at my boots, he made a clicking noise with his tongue. I couldn't lie to him, and I knew that he'd guessed that she played some sort of part in what had happened to me. He looked at Alice again. "Open your mouth, girl," he said harshly, his voice full of anger. "I want to see your teeth." Alice obeyed, and the spook suddenly reached forward, seizing her by the jaw. He brought his face close to her open mouth and sniffed very loudly. When he turned back to me, his mood seemed to have softened, and he gave a deep sigh. "Her breath is still sweet enough," he said. "You smelled the breath of the other?" he asked. Realizing Alice's jaw and pointing down at Bony Lizzie, I nodded. "It's caused by her diet," he said, "and it tells you right away what she's been up to. Those who practice bone or blood magic get a taste for blood and raw meat, but the girl seems all right." Then he moved his face close to Alice again. "Look into my eyes, girl," he told her. I'll be right back, guys. That call is coming in. Sorry guys, I really had to take that call, but now that it's over with, unpin. How do I get rid of this? There we go. Thank you. Hi Goku. Hi Leon. I'm back. Sorry it took a minute. It was a pretty important call that I couldn't miss. Anyways, let me see how much more of this. Oh. Well, snap. We're only 2 pages left for this chapter to be over with. So let me go ahead and get it over with, and then we'll take another break, and then I'll continue with the last chapter for today after. Where did I leave off? Alright. Hold my gaze as long as you can, Alice did as he told her. But she couldn't look at him for long, even though her mouth was twitching with the effort. She dropped her eyes and began to cry softly. The spook looked down at her pointy shoes and shook his head sadly. I don't know, he said, turning to me again. I just don't know what to do for the best. It's not just her. We've others to think about. Innocents who might suffer in the future. She's seen too much and she knows too much for her own good. It could go either way with her, and I don't know if it's safe to let her go. If she goes east to join the Broad in Pendle, then she'll be lost forever, and she'll just add to the dark. Haven't you anywhere else to go? I asked Alice gently. No other relations? There's a village near the coast. It's called Stammen. I've another aunt lives there. Perhaps she'd take me in. Is she like the others? The spook asked, staring at Alice again. Not so you'd notice, she replied. Still, it's a long way, and I ain't ever been there before. Could take 3 days or more to get there. I could send the lad with you, said the spook, his voice suddenly a lot kinder. He had a good look at my maps, so I reckon he should be able to find the way. When he gets back, he'll be learning how to fold them up properly. Anyway, it's decided. I'm going to give you a chance, girl. It's up to you whether you take it. If you don't, then one day we'll meet again, and the next time you won't be so lucky. Then the spook pulled the unusual cloth from his pocket. Inside it was a hunk of cheese for the journey. Just so you don't go hungry, he said, but don't eat it all at once. I hoped we might find something better to eat on the way, but I still mumbled my thanks. Don't go straight to Stammen, said the spook, staring at me hard without blinking. I want you to go home first. Take the girl with you, and let your mother talk to her. I've a feeling she might just be able to help. I'll expect you back within 2 weeks. That brought a smile to my face. After all of that had happened, a chance to go home for a while was a dream come true. But one thing did puzzle me, because I remembered the letter my ma'am had sent to the spook. He hadn't seemed that happy with some of the things she said. So why should he think my ma'am would be able to help Alice? I didn't say anything, because I didn't want to risk making the spook have second thoughts. I was just glad to be away. Before we left, I told him about Billy. He nodded sadly, but said not to worry because he'd do what was necessary. As we set off, I glanced back and saw the spook carrying bony Lizzie over his left shoulder and striding away to Chippenden. From behind, you'd have taken him for a man 30 years younger. And that's the end of chapter 11, The Pit. Alright guys, I know I was gone taking a phone call for a little bit, but I'm gonna do another little break for everybody else to get more drinks or food or whatever it is that y'all want to do. I'm just gonna mute myself for a little bit to drink some more of my coffee and prepare myself for our last chapter. Alright, you guys, we're gonna go on to chapter 12, and this one is a pretty thick chapter, but we're actually getting really close to the end of our first book series, The Last Apprentice. As a little nod real quick to those that haven't even heard the beginning of the story, I do upload these VODs to my YouTube channel. So if you guys want to catch up with the beginning of the story and see how it goes from there, you could always tune in on my YouTube channel and watch the VODs from there. I have them categorized too, so they should all be in one folder for everybody who wants to be able to go back from the very beginning of the series. Now we're going to go ahead and continue to chapter 12, The Desperate and the Dizzy. As we came down the hill toward the farm, warm drizzle was drifting into our faces. Somewhere far off, a dog barked twice, but below us everything was quiet and still. It was late afternoon, and I knew that my dad and Jack would be out in the fields, which would give me a chance to talk to Ma'am alone. It was easy for the spook to tell me to take Alice home with me, but the journey had given me time to think. I didn't know how Ma'am would take it. I didn't feel she'd be happy having someone like Alice in the house. especially when I told her what she'd been up to. And as for Jack, I had a pretty good idea what his reaction would be. From what Ellie had told me last time about his attitude to my new job, having the niece of a witch in the house was the last thing he'd want. As we crossed the yard, I pointed to the barn. "Better shelter under there," I said. "I'll go in and explain." No sooner had I spoken than the loud cry of a hungry baby came from the direction of the farmhouse. Alice's eyes met mine briefly, then she looked down, and I remembered the last time we'd been together when a child had cried. Without a word, Alice turned and walked into the barn, her silence more than I expected. You'd think that after all that had happened, there had been a lot to talk about on the journey, but we'd hardly spoken. I think she had been upset by the way the spook had held her by the jaw and smelled her breath. Maybe it had made her think about all the things she'd been up to in the past. Whatever it was, she seemed deep in thought and very sad for the most of the time. I suppose I could have tried harder, but I was too tired and weary, so we walked in silence until it had grown into a habit. It was a mistake. I should have made the effort to get to know Alice better then. It might have saved me a lot of trouble later. As I jerked open the back door, the crying stopped, and I heard another sound, the comforting click of Mam's rocking chair. The chair was by the window, but the curtains weren't fully drawn, and I could see her by her face as she'd been peering through the narrow gap between them. She'd watched us enter the yard, and as I came into the room, she began to rock the chair faster and harder, staring at me all the while without blinking. One half of her face in darkness, the other lit by the large candle that was flickering in its big brass holder in the center of the table. "When you bring a guest with you, it's good manners to invite her into the house," she said, her voice a mixture of annoyance and surprise. "I thought I'd taught you better than that." "Mr. Gregory told me to bring her here," I said. "Her name's Alice, but she's been keeping bad company. He wants you to talk to her, but I thought it was best to tell you what's happened first, just in case you didn't want to invite her in." So I drew up a chair and told Ma'am exactly what had happened. When I finished, she let out a long sigh, then a faint smile softened her face. "You've done well, son," she told me. "You're young and new to the job, so your mistakes can be forgiven. Go and bring that poor girl in, then leave us alone to talk. You might want to go upstairs and say hello to your new niece. Ellie will certainly be glad to see you." So I brought Alice in, left her with my ma'am, and went upstairs. Ellie was in the biggest room. It used to belong to my ma'am and dad, but they let her and Jack have it because there was room for another 2 beds and a cot, which would come in useful as their family grew. I knocked lightly on the door, which was half open, but only looked into the room when Ellie called out for me to go in. She was sitting on the edge of a big double bed feeding the baby, its head half hidden by her pink shawl. As soon as she saw me, her mouth widened into a smile that made me feel welcome, but she looked tired and her hair lank and greasy. Although I glanced away quickly, Ellie was sharp and I knew she'd see me staring and read the expression in my eyes, because she quickly smoothed the hair away from her brow. "Oh, I'm sorry, Tom," she said. "I must look like a mess. I've been up all night. I've just grabbed an hour's sleep. You've got to get it while you can with a very hungry baby like this. She cries a lot, especially at night." "How old is she?" I asked. "She'll be just 6 days old tonight. She was born not long after midnight last Saturday." That was the night I killed Mother Malkin. For a moment the memory of it came rushing back, and a shiver ran down my spine. She's finished feeding now, Allie said with a smile. Would you like to hold her? That was the last thing I wanted to do. The baby was so small and delicate that I was scared of squeezing it too hard or dropping it. And I didn't like the way its head was so floppy. It was hard to say no, though, because Ellie would have been hurt. As it was, I didn't have to hold the baby for long, because the moment it was in my arms, its little face went red and began to cry. I don't think it likes me, I told Ellie. She's a she, not an it, Ellie scolded, making her face all stern and outraged. Don't worry, it's not you, Tom, she said, her mouth softening into a smile. I think she's still hungry, that's all. The baby stopped crying the moment Ellie took her back, and I didn't stay long after that. Then on my way downstairs, I heard a sound from the kitchen I hadn't expected. It was laughter, the loud, hearty laughter of two people getting on very well together. The moment I opened the door and walked in, Alice's face became very serious, but Ma'am carried on laughing aloud for a few moments, and even when she stopped, her face was still lit up with a wide smile. They'd been sharing a joke, a very funny joke, but I didn't like to ask what it was, and they didn't tell me. The look in both their eyes made me feel that it was something private. My dad once told me that women knows things that men don't. That sometimes they have a certain look in their eyes, but when you see it, you should never ask them what they're thinking. If you do, they might tell you something you don't want to hear. Well, whatever they've been laughing at had certainly brought them closer. From that moment on, it seemed as if they'd known each other for years. The spook had been right. If anyone could sort Alice out, it had to be Ma'am. I did notice one thing, though. Ma'am gave Alice the room opposite of hers and Dad's. There were 2 rooms at the top of the first flight of stairs. Ma'am had very sharp ears, and it meant that if Alice so much as turned over in her sleep, she would hear it. So for all that laughter, Ma'am was still watching Alice. When he came back from the fields, Jack gave me a really dark scowl and muttered to himself. He seemed angry at something, but Dad was pleased to see me, and to my surprise, he shook hands with me. He always shook hands when greeting my other brothers who'd left home, but this was the first time for me. It made me feel sad and proud at the same time. He was treating me as if I were a man, making my own way in the world. Jack hadn't been in the house 5 minutes when he came looking for me. Outside, he said, keeping his voice low so that nobody else could hear. I want to talk to you. We walked out into the yard, and he led the way around the side of the barn, close to the pig pens where we couldn't be seen from the house. Who's the girl you've brought back with you? Her name's Alice. It's just someone who needs help, I said. The spook told me to bring her home so that Ma'am could talk to her. What do you mean she needs help? She's been keeping bad company, that's all. What sort of bad company? I knew he wouldn't like it, but I had no choice. I had to tell him. Otherwise, he'd only ask Ma'am. Her aunt's a witch, but don't worry. The spook sorted it all out and will only be staying for a few days. Jack exploded. I've never seen him so angry. Don't you have a sense you were born with? He shouted. Didn't you think about the baby? There's an innocent child living in this house, and you bring home someone from a family like that? It's beyond belief. He raised his fist, and I thought he was going to thump me. Instead, he smashed it sideways into the wall of the barn, the sudden thud sending the pigs into a frenzy. Ma'am thinks it's all right, I protested. Aye, Mom would, said Jack, his voice suddenly lowered, but still harsh with anger. How could she refuse? Her favorite son, anything. And she's just too good-hearted. As well, you know. That's why you shouldn't take advantage. Look, it's me you'll answer to if anything happens. I don't like the look of that girl. She looks shifty. I'll be watching her carefully. And if she takes one step out of line, you'll both be on your way before you can blink. And you'll earn your keep while you're here. She can help around the house to make things easier for Ma'am. And you can pull your weight with the farm work. Jack turned and started to walk away, but he still had more to say. Being so occupied with more important things, he added sarcastically. You might not have noticed how tired Dad looks. He's finding the job harder and harder. Of course I'll help, I called after him. So will Alice. At supper, apart from Ma'am, everyone was really quiet. I suppose it was having a stranger sitting at the table with us. Although Jack's manners wouldn't let him complain outright, he scowled at Alice almost as much as he did at me. So it was a good job Ma'am was cheerful and bright enough to light up the whole table. Ellie had to leave her supper twice to attend to the baby, which kept crying fit to bring the roof down. The second time she fetched it downstairs. Never known a baby to cry so much, said Ma'am with a smile. At least it's got strong, healthy lungs. Its tiny face was all red and screwed up again. I would never have said it to Ellie, but it wasn't the best looking of babies. Its face reminded me of an angry little old woman. One moment it was crying fit to burst. Then very suddenly it became still and quiet. Its eyes were wide open and it was staring toward the center of the table, where Alice was seated close to the big brass candlestick. At first I didn't think anything of it. I thought Ellie's baby was just fascinated by the candle flame. But later Alice helped Ma'am clear the table, and each time Alice passed by, the baby followed her with its blue eyes, and suddenly, although the kitchen was warm, I shivered. Later, I went up to my old bedroom, and when I sat down in the wicker chair by the window and gazed out, it was as if I'd never left home. As I looked northward toward Hangman's Hill, I thought about the way the baby had seemed so interested in Alice. When I remembered what Ellie had said earlier, I shivered again. Her baby had been born after midnight on the night of the full moon. It was too close to just be a coincidence. Mother Malcolm would have been swept away by the river about the time that Ellie's baby had been born. The spook had warned me about that she'd come back. What if she'd come back even earlier than he'd predicted? He expected her to be a wick, but what if he was wrong? What if she'd broken free of her bones and her spirit had possessed Ellie's baby at the very moment of its birth? I didn't sleep a wink that night. There was only one person I could talk to about my fears, and that was Ma'am. The difficulty was in getting her alone without drawing attention to the fact that I was doing it. Ma'am cooked and did other chores that kept her busy most of the day, and usually it would have been no problem to talk to her in the kitchen because I was working close by. Jack had given me the job of repairing the front of the barn, and I must have hammered hundreds of shiny new nails before sunset. Alice was the difficulty, though. Ma'am kept her with her all day, really making the girl work hard. You could see the sweat on her brow and the frowns that kept furrowing her forehead. But despite that, Alice never complained even once. It was only after supper, when they finished the clatter of washing and drying the dishes, that I finally got my chance. That morning, Dad had gone off to the big spring market in Tople. He could conduct his business, and it gave him a rare chance to meet up with a few of his old friends, so he'd be away for 2 or 3 days. Jack was right. He did look tired, and it would give him a break from the farm. Ma'am had sent Alice off to her room to get some rest. Jack had his feet up in the front room, and Ellie was upstairs trying to grab half an hour's sleep before the baby woke again for feeding. So, wasting no time at all, I started to tell Ma'am what was worrying me. She'd been rocking in her chair, but I hardly managed to blurt out my first sentence before the chair came to a halt. She listened carefully as I told her of my fears and the reasons to suspect the baby, but her face remained so still and calm that I had no idea what she was thinking. No sooner had I spat out my last word than she rose to her feet. "Wait there," she said. "We need to sort this out once and for all." She left the kitchen and went upstairs. When she came back, she was carrying the baby, wrapped in Ellie's shawl. "Bring the candle," she said, moving toward the door. We went out into the yard, Ma'am walking fast as if she knew exactly where she was going and what she was going to do. We ended up at the other side of the cattle midden, standing in the mud on the edge of our pond, which was deep enough and large enough to provide water for our cows even through the driest summer months. "Keep the candle high so we can see everything," Ma'am said. "I want there to be no doubt." Then, to my horror, she stretched out her arms and held the baby over the dark, still water. "If she floats, the witch is inside her," Ma'am said. "If she sinks, she's innocent." "Right. Let's see." "No!" I shouted, my mouth opening all by itself and the words just tumbling out faster than I could think. "Don't do it, please. It's Ellie's baby." For a moment, I thought she was going to let the baby fall anyway. Then she smiled and held it close again and kissed it on the forehead very gently. "Of course it's Ellie's baby, son. Can't you tell just by looking at her? Anyway, swimming is a test carried out by fools and doesn't work anyway. Usually they tie the poor woman's hands to her feet and throw her into the deep, still water. But whether she sinks or floats depends on luck and the kind of the body she has. It's nothing to do with witchcraft." "What about the way the baby kept staring at Alice?" I asked. Ma'am smiled and shook her head. "A newborn baby's eyes aren't able to focus properly," she explained. "It was probably just the light of the candle that caught her attention. Remember, Alice was sitting close to it. Later each time Alice passed by, the baby's eyes would just have been drawn by the change in the light. It's nothing to worry about at all." "But what if Ellie's baby is possessed anyway?" I asked. "What if there's something inside her that we can't see?" "Look, son, I've delivered both good and evil into this world, and I know evil just by looking at it. This is a good child, and there's nothing inside her to worry about. Nothing at all. Isn't it strange, though, that Ellie's baby should be born about the same time that Mother Malkin died?" "Not really," Ma'am answered. "It's the way of things. Sometimes, when something bad leaves the world, something good enters in its place. I've seen it happen before." Of course. I realized then that Ma'am had never even considered dropping the baby and had just been trying to shock some sense into me. But as we walked back across the yard, my knees were still trembling with the thought of it. It was then, as we reached the kitchen door, I remembered something. "Mr. Gregory gave me a little book all about possession," I said. "He told me to read it carefully, but the trouble is, it's written in Latin, and I've only had 3 lessons so far." "It's not my favorite language," Ma'am said, pausing by the door. "I'll see what I can do, but it'll have to wait until I get back. I'm expecting to be called away tonight. In the meantime, why don't you ask Alice? She might be able to help." Ma'am was right about being called away. A cart came for her just after midnight, the horses all in sweat. It seemed that the farmer's wife was having a really bad time of it and had already been in labor for more than a day and a night. It was a long way as well, almost 20 miles to the south. That meant that man would be away for a couple days or more. I didn't really want to ask Alice to help with the Latin. You see, I knew the spook would have disapproved. After all, it was a book from his library, and he wouldn't have liked the idea of Alice even touching it. Still, what choice did I have? Since coming home, I've been thinking about Mother Malcolm more and more, and I just couldn't get her out of my head. It was just an instinct, just a feeling, but I felt that she was somewhere out there in the dark, and she was getting nearer with each night that passed. One sec as I drink some coffee. So the following night, after Jack and Helly had gone to bed, I tapped softly on Alice's bedroom door. It wasn't something I could ask her during the day because she was always busy. And if Ellie or Jack overheard, they wouldn't like it, especially with Jack's dislike of the spook's business. I had to rap twice before Alice opened the door. I've been worried that she might already be in bed asleep, but she still hadn't undressed, and I couldn't stop my eyes from glancing down at her pointy shoes. On the dressing table, there was a candle set close to the mirror. It had just been blown out. It was still smoking. "Can I come in?" I asked, holding my own candle high so that it lit her face from above. "There's something I need to ask you." Alice nodded me inside and closed the door. "I have a book that I need to read, but it's written in Latin. Ma'am said you might be able to help." "Where is it?" asked Alice. "In my pocket. It's only a small book. For someone who knows Latin, reading it shouldn't take that long." Alice gave a deep, weary sigh. "I'm busy enough as it is," she complained. "What's it about?" "Possession. Mr. Gregory thinks Mother Malcolm could come back to get me and that she'll use possession." "Let's see it then," she asked, holding out her hand. I placed my candle next to hers, then reached into my breeches and pulled out the small book. She skimmed through the pages without a word. "Can you read it?" I asked. "Don't see why not. Lizzie taught me, and she knows her Latin backward." "So you'll help me?" She didn't reply. Instead, she brought the book very close to her face and sniffed it loudly. "You sure this is any good?" she asked. "Written by a priest, this is, and they don't usually know that much." "Mr. Gregory called it definitive work," I said, "which means it's the best book ever written on the subject." She looked up from the book then, and to my surprise, her eyes were filled with anger. "I know what definitive means," she said. "Think I'm stupid or something? Studied for years, I have. Well, you've only just started. Lizzie had lots of books, but they're all burned now, all gone up in flames." I muttered that I was sorry, and she gave me a smile. "Trouble is," she said, her voice suddenly softening, "reading this will take time, and I'm too tired to start now. Tomorrow your man will still be away, and I'll be as busy as ever. That sister-in-law of yours has promised to help, but she'll mostly be busy with the baby, and the cooking and the cleaning will take me most of the day. But if you were to help..." It's getting to that point that my throat's crackling. I didn't know what to say. I'd be helping Jack, so I wouldn't have much free time. The trouble was, men never did any cooking or cleaning, and it wasn't just that way on our farm. It was the same everywhere in the county. Men worked on the farm, outdoors in all weathers, and when they came in, the women had a hot meal waiting on the table. The only time we ever helped in the kitchen was on Christmas Day, when we did the washing up as a special treat for Ma'am. It was as if Alice could read my mind, because her smile grew wider. "Won't be too hard, will it?" she asked. "Women feed the chickens and help with the harvest, so why shouldn't men help in the kitchen? Just help me with the washing up, that's all. And some of the pans will need some scoring before I start cooking." So I agreed to what she wanted. What choice did I have? I only hoped that Jack couldn't catch me at it. He'd never understand. I got up even earlier than usual and managed to score the pans before Jack came down. Then I took my time over breakfast, eating very slowly, which was unlike me and enough to draw at least one suspicious glance from Jack. After he'd gone off to the fields, I washed the pots as quickly as I could and set to drying them. I might have guessed what would happen, because Jack never had much patience. He came into the yard cursing and swearing and saw me through the window, his face all screwed up in disbelief. Then he spat into the yard and came around and pulled open the kitchen door with a jerk. "When you're ready," he said sarcastically, "there's men's work to be done, and you can start by checking and repairing the pig pens. Snout's coming tomorrow. There are 5 to be slaughtered, and we don't want to spend all our time rounding up strays." Snout was our nickname for the pig butcher, and Jack was right. Pigs sometimes panicked when Snout got to work, and if there was any weakness in the fence, they'd find it for sure. Jack turned to stamp away and then suddenly cursed loudly. I went to the door to see what was the matter. He accidentally stepped on a big fat toad, squashing it to a pulp. It was supposed to be bad luck to kill a frog or a toad, and Jack cursed again, frowning so much that his black bushy eyebrows met in the middle. He kicked the dead toad under the drain spout and went off, shaking his head. I couldn't think what had gotten into him. Jack never used to be so bad-tempered. I stayed behind and dried up the last pot, as he caught me at it. I might as well finish the job. Besides, pigs stank, and I wasn't much looking forward to the job that Jack had given me. "Don't forget the book," I reminded Alice as I opened the door to leave, but she just gave me a strange smile. I didn't get to speak to Alice alone again until late that night, after Jack and Ellie had gone off to bed. I thought I'd come to visit her room again, but instead she came down into the kitchen carrying the book and sat herself down in Mam's rocking chair, close to the embers of the fire. "Made a good job of those pans, you did. Must be desperate to find out what's in here," Alice said, tapping the spine of the book. "If she comes back, I want to be ready, and I need to know what I can do. The spook says she'll probably be Wick. Do you know about that?" Alice's eyes widened and she nodded. "So I need to be ready. If there's anything in that book that can help, I need to know about it." "The priest ain't like the others," Alice said, holding the book out toward me. "Mostly knows his stuff." "He does. Lizzie would love this more than midnight cakes." I pushed the book into my breeches pocket and drew up a stool on the other side of the hearth, facing what was left of the fire. Then I started to question Alice. At first it was really hard work. She didn't volunteer much, and what I did manage to drag out of her just made me feel a lot worse. I began with the strange title of the book: Possession, the Damned, the Dizzy, and the Desperate. What did it mean? Why call the book that? "First word is just priest talk," Alice said, turning down the corners of her mouth in disapproval. "They just use damned for people who do things differently. For people like your ma'am, who don't go to church and say the right prayers. People who aren't like them. People who are left-handed," she said, giving me a knowing smile. Second word's more useful, Alice continued. A body that's newly possessed has poor balance. It keeps falling over. Takes time, you see, for the possessor that's moved in to fit itself comfortably into its new body. It's like trying to wear a new pair of shoes. Makes it bad-tempered, too. Someone calm and placid can strike out without warning. So that's another way you can tell. Then, as for the third word, that's easy. A witch who once had a healthy human body is desperate to get another one. Then, once she succeeds, she's desperate to hold on to it. Ain't going to give it up without a fight. She'll do anything at all. That's why the possessed are so dangerous. If she came here, who would it be? I asked. If she were a wick, who would she try to possess? Would it be me? Would she try to hurt me that way? Would if she could, Alice said. Ain't easy, though. What with you being what you are. Like to use me, too. But I won't give her the chance. No. She'll go for the weakest, the easiest. Ellie's baby. No. That ain't no use to her. She'd have to wait till it's all grown up. Mother Malcolm never had much patience, and being trapped in that pit at old Gregory's would have made her worse. If it's you she's coming to hurt, first she'll get herself a strong, healthy body. Ellie, then? She'll choose Ellie? Don't you know anything? Alice said, shaking her head in disbelief. Ellie's strong. She'd be difficult. No, men are much easier. Especially a man whose heart always rules his head. Someone who can fly into a temper without even thinking. Jack. It'll be Jack for sure. Think what it'd be like to have a big, strong Jack after you. But the book's right about one thing. A body that's newly possessed is easier to deal with. Desperate it is, but dizzy too. I got my notebook out and wrote down anything that seemed important. Alice didn't talk as fast as the spook, but after a bit, she got into her stride, and it wasn't long before my wrist was aching. When it came to the really important business, how to deal with the possessed, there were lots of reminders that the original soul was still trapped inside the body. So if you hurt the body, you hurt that innocent soul as well. So just killing the body to get rid of the possessor was as bad as murder. In fact, that section of the book was disappointing. There didn't seem to be a lot you could do. Being a priest, the writer thought that an exorcism, using candles and holy water, was the best way to draw out the possessor and release the victim. But he admitted that not all priests could do it, and that very few could do it really well. It seemed to me that some of the priests who could do it were probably seventh sons of the seventh sons, and that was what really mattered. After all that, Alice said she felt tired and went up to the bed. I was feeling sleepy too. I'd forgotten how hard farm work could be, and I was aching from head to toe. Once up in my room, I sank gratefully into my bed, anxious to sleep. But down in the yard, the dogs had started to bark. Thinking that something must have alarmed them, I opened the window and looked out toward Hangman's Hill, taking a deep breath of night's air to steady myself and clear my head. Gradually, the dogs became quieter and eventually stopped barking altogether. As I was about to close the window, the moon came out from behind the cloud. Moonlight can show the truth of things. Alice had told me that. Just as that big shadow of mine had told phony Lizzie that there was something different about me. This wasn't even a full moon, just a waning moon shrinking down to a crescent. But it showed me something new, something that couldn't be seen without it. By its light, I could see a faint silver trail winding down Hangman's Hill. It crept under the fence and across the north pasture, then crossed the eastern hayfield until it vanished from sight somewhere behind the barn. I thought of Mother Malkin then. I'd seen the silver trail the night I knocked her into the river. Now here was another trail that looked just the same, and it had found me. My heart thudding in my chest, I tiptoed downstairs and slipped out through the back door, closing it carefully behind me. The moon had gone behind a cloud, so when I went around the back of the barn, the silver trail had vanished. But there was still clear evidence that something had moved down the hill toward our farm buildings. The grass was flattened as if a giant snail had slithered across it. I waited for the moon to reappear so that I could check the flagged area behind the barn. A few moments later, and the cloud blew away, and I saw something that really scared me. The silver trail gleamed in the moonlight, and in the direction it had taken was unmistakable. It avoided the pig pen and snaked around the other side of the barn in a wide arc to reach the far edge of the yard. Then it moved toward the house, ending directly under Alice's window, where the old wooden hatch covered the steps that led down to the cellar. A few generations back, the farmer who lived here used to brew ale, which he supplied to the local farms and even a couple of inns. Because of that, the locals called our farm Brewer's Farm, although we just called it home. The steps there so that barrels could be taken in and out without having to go through the house. The hatch was still in place, covering the steps, a big rusty padlock holding it 2 halves in position. But there was a narrow gap between them, where the 2 edges of the wood didn't quite meet. It was a gap no wider than my thumb, but the silver trail ended exactly there, and I knew that whatever had slithered toward this point had somehow slipped through the tiny gap. Mother Malcolm was back, and she was a wick. Her body soft and pliable enough to slip through the narrowest of gaps. She was already in the cellar. We never used the cellar now, but I remembered it well enough. It had a dirt floor, and it was mostly full of old barrels. The walls of the house were thick and hollow, which meant that soon she could be anywhere inside the walls, anywhere in the house. I glanced up and saw the flicker of a candle flame in the window of Alice's room. She was still up. I went inside. And moments later, I was standing outside her bedroom door. The trick was to tap just loud enough to let Alice know I was there without waking anybody else up. Oh, thank you for the follow, Aldrich. Thank you for the follow. I hope you enjoy your time here, and I hope you enjoy the story. But as I held my knuckles close to the door, ready to knock, I heard a sound from inside the room. I could hear Alice's voice. She seemed to be talking to someone. I didn't like what I was hearing, but I tapped anyway. I waited a moment, but when Alice didn't come to the door, I put my ear against it. Who could she be talking to in her room? I knew that Allie and Jack were already in bed, and anyway, I could hear only one voice, and that was Alice's. It seemed different, though. It reminded me of something. When I suddenly remembered what it was, I moved my ear away from the wood as if it had been burned and took a big step away from the door. Her voice was raising and falling, just like Bony Lizzie's had when she'd been standing above the pit, holding a small white thumb bone in each hand. Almost before I realized what I was doing, I seized the door handle, turned it, and opened the door wide. Alice, her mouth opening and closing, was chanting at the mirror. She was sitting on the edge of the straight-backed chair, staring over the top of a candle flame into the dressing table mirror. I took a deep breath, then crept nearer so as is to get a better look. It was a county spring and after dark, so the room had a chill to it. But despite that, there were big beads of sweat on Alice's brow. Even as I watched, two came together and ran down into her left eye, and then beyond it onto her cheek like a tear. She was staring into the mirror, her eyes very wide, but when I called her name, she never even blinked. I moved behind the chair and caught the reflection of the brass candlestick in the mirror, but to my horror, the face in the mirror above the flame didn't belong to Alice. It was an old face, haggard and lined, with coarse gray and white hair falling like curtains across each gaunt cheek. It was the face of something that had spent a long time in the damp ground. The eyes moved then, flickering to the left to meet my gaze. They were red points of fire. Although the face cracked into a smile, the eyes were burning with anger and hate. There was no doubt. It was the face of Mother Malkin. What was happening? Was Alice already possessed? Or was she somehow using the mirror to talk to Mother Malkin? Without thinking, I seized the candlestick and I swung its heavy base into the mirror, which exploded with a loud crack, followed by a glittering, tinkling shower of falling glass. As the mirror shattered, Alice screamed, loud and shrill. It was the worst screech you could possibly imagine. It was filled with torment and reminded me of the noise of a pig sometimes makes when it's slaughtered. But I didn't feel sorry for Alice, even though now she's crying and pulling at her hair, her eyes wild, filled with terror. I was aware that the house was quickly filled with other sounds. The first was the cry of Ellie's baby. The second was a man's deep voice cursing and swearing. The third was big boots stamping down the stairs. Jack burst furiously into the room. He took one look at the broken mirror, then stepped toward me and raised his fist. I suppose he must have thought it was all my fault, because Alice was still screaming. I was holding the candlestick, and there were small cuts on my knuckles caused by the flying glass. Just in time, Ellie came into the room. She had her baby cradle in her right arm, and it was still crying, fit to burst. But with her free hand, she got a grip on Jack and pulled at him until he unclenched his fist and lowered his arm. "No, Jack," she pleaded. "What good will that do?" "I can't believe you done that," Jack said, glaring at me. "Do you know how old that mirror was? What do you think Dad will say now? How will he feel when he sees this?" No wonder Jack was angry. It had been bad enough waking everybody up, but that dressing table had belonged to Dad's ma'am. Now that Dad had given me the tinderbox, it was the last thing he owned that once belonged to his family. Jack took 2 steps towards me. The candle hadn't gone out when I'd broken the mirror, but when he shouted again, it began to flicker. "Why did you do that? What on earth's gotten into you?" he roared. What could I say? So I just shrugged, then stared down at my boots. "What are you going to do? What are you doing in this room anyway?" Jack persisted. I didn't answer. Anything I said would only make it worse. "Stay in your own room from now on," Jack shouted. "I've a good mind to send the pair of you packing now." I glanced toward Alice, who was still sitting on the chair, her head in her hands. She stopped crying, but her whole body was shaking. When I looked back, Jack's anger had given way to alarm. He was staring at Ellie, who suddenly seemed to stagger. Before he could move, she lost her balance and fell back against the wall. Jack forgot about the mirror for a few moments while he fussed over Ellie. "I don't know what came over me," she said, all flustered. "I suddenly felt lightheaded. Oh, Jack. Jack, I nearly dropped the baby. You didn't, and she's safe. Don't worry yourself. Here, let me take her. Once he had the baby in his arms, Jack calmed down. For now, just clear this mess up, he told me. We'll talk about it in the morning. Ellie walked across to the bed and put her hand on Alice's shoulder. Alice, you come downstairs for a bit while Tom tidies up, she said. I'll make us all a drink. Moments later, they all gone down to the kitchen, leaving me to pick up the pieces of glass. After about 10 minutes, I went down there myself to get a brush and pan. They were sitting around the kitchen table sipping herb tea, the baby asleep in Ellie's arms. They weren't talking, and nobody offered me a drink. Nobody even glanced in my direction. I went back upstairs and cleared up the mess as best as I could, then went back to my own room. I sat on the bed and stared through the window, feeling terrified and alone. Was Alice already possessed? After all, it had been Mother Malcolm's face staring back out of the mirror. If she was, then the baby and everyone else were in real danger. She hadn't tried to do anything then, but Alice was relatively small compared to Jack. So Mother Malcolm would have to be sly. I need another swig of my coffee. She'd wait for everyone to go to sleep. I'd be the main target. Or maybe the baby. A child's blood would increase her strength. Or had I broken the mirror just in time? Had I broken the spell at the very moment when Mother Malcolm was about to possess Alice? Another possibility was that Alice had just been talking to the witch, using the mirror. Even so, that was bad enough. It meant I had two enemies to worry about. I needed to do something. But what? While I sat there, my head whirling, trying to think things through, there was a tap on my bedroom door. I thought it was Alice, so I didn't go. Then, a voice called my name softly. It was Ellie, so I opened the door. Can we talk inside? She asked. I don't want to risk waking the baby. I've only just gotten her off to sleep again. I nodded. So Ellie came in and carefully closed the door behind her. You all right? She asked, looking concerned. I nodded miserably, but couldn't meet her eyes. Would you like to tell me about it? She asked. You're a sensible lad, Tom, and you must have had a very good reason for what you did. Talking it through might make you feel better. How could I tell her the truth? I mean, Ellie had a baby to care for, so how could I tell her that there was a witch somewhere loose in the house with a taste for children's blood? Then I realized that, for the sake of the baby, I would have to tell her something. She had to know just how bad things were. She had to get away. There is something, Ellie, but I don't know how to tell you. Ellie smiled. The beginning would be a good place as any. Something followed me back here, I said, looking Ellie straight into her eyes. Something evil that wants to hurt me. That's why I broke the mirror. Alice was talking to it, and Ellie's eyes suddenly flashed with anger. Tell Jack that, and you certainly would feel his fist. You mean you brought something back here, when I've got a new baby to care for? How could you? How could you do that? I didn't know it was going to happen, I protested. I only found out tonight. That's why I'm telling you now. You need to leave the house and take the baby to safety. Go now, before it's too late. What? Right now? In the middle of the night? I nodded. Ellie shook her head firmly. Jack wouldn't go. He wouldn't be driven out of his own house in the middle of the night. Not by anything. No, I'll wait. I'm going to stay here. And I'm going to say my prayers. My mother taught me that. She said that if you pray really hard, nothing from the dark can ever harm you. And I really do believe that. Anyway, you could be wrong, Tom, she added. You're young and only just beginning to learn the job, so it may not be quite as bad as you think. And your ma'am should be back at any time. If not tonight, then certainly tomorrow night. She'll know what to do. In the meantime, just keep out of the girls' room. There's something not right about her. As I opened my mouth to speak, intending to have one more go at persuading her to leave, an expression of alarm suddenly came over Ellie's face, and she stumbled and put her hand against the wall to save herself from falling. Look what you've done now. I feel faint just thinking about what's going on here. She sat down on my bed and put her head in her hands, while I just stared down at her miserably, not knowing what to do or say. After a few moments, she climbed back to her feet again. We need to talk to your ma'am as soon as she gets back. But don't forget, stay away from Alice until then. Do you promise? I promised. And with a sad smile, Ellie went back to her own room. It was only when she'd gone that it struck me. Ellie had stumbled for a second time and said she felt lightheaded. One stumble could just be a chance. Just tiredness. But twice? She was dizzy. Ellie was dizzy. And that was the first sign of possession. I began to pace up and down. Surely I was wrong. Not Ellie. It couldn't be Ellie. Maybe Ellie was just tired. After all, the baby did keep her awake a lot. But Ellie was strong and healthy. She'd been brought up on a farm herself and wasn't one to let things drag her down. And all that talk about saying prayers. She could have said that so I wouldn't suspect her. But hadn't Alice told me that Ellie would be difficult to possess? She also said that it would probably be Jack. But he hadn't shown any signs of dizziness. Still, there was no denying that he had become more and more bad-tempered, and aggressive too. If Ellie hadn't held him back, he'd have thumped my head off my shoulders. But of course, if Alice were in league with Mother Malcolm, everything she said would be intended to put me off the scent. I couldn't even trust her account of the Spook's book. She could have told me lies all along. I couldn't read Latin, so there was no way to check what she said. I realized that it could be any one of them. An attack could occur at any moment, and I hadn't any way of knowing who it would come from. With luck, Ma'am would be back before dawn. She'd know what to do. But dawn was a long time off, so I couldn't afford to sleep. I had to keep watch all night long. If Jack or Ellie were possessed, there was nothing I could do about it. I couldn't go into their room, so all I could do was keep an eye on Alice. I went outside and sat on the stairs between the door to Ellie and Jack's room and my own. From there, I could see Alice's door below. If she left her room, at least I'd be able to give a warning. I decided that if Ma'am wasn't back, I'd leave at dawn, apart from her. There was just one more chance of help. It was a long night, and at first I jumped at the slightest sound. A creak of the stairs or a faint movement of the floorboards in one of the rooms. But gradually I calmed down. It was an old house, and these were the noises I was used to. The noises you expected as it slowly settled and cooled down during the night. However, as dawn approached, I started to feel uneasy again. I began to hear faint scratching noises from inside the walls. It sounded like fingernails clawing at stone, and it wasn't always in the same place. Sometimes it was farther up the stairs, on the left, sometimes below, close to Alice's room. It was so faint that it was hard to tell whether I was imagining it or not. But I began to feel cold, really cold, and that told me that danger was near. Next, the dogs began to bark, and within a few minutes the other animals were going crazy too. The hairy pig squealing so loud you'd have thought the pig butcher had already arrived. If that wasn't enough, the Rose started the babies crying again. I was so cold now that my whole body was shaking and trembling. I just had to do something. On the riverbank, facing the witch, my hands had known what to do. This time, it was my legs that acted faster than I could think. I stood up and ran. Terrified, my heart hammering, I bounded down the stairs, adding to the noise. I just had to get outside and away from the witch. Nothing else mattered. All my courage had gone. And that is the end of chapter 12. Alright, you guys. Let me see how many chapters we have left. We're really close to the end of this book. Oh. What is this? Ah. Interesting. We seem to be actually on the last 2 chapters of this book. But unfortunately, my throat can't handle it, or else I would have read the last few chapters of the book. So we're gonna hold off on it till next Monday, and then we'll end this book series then. Alright, guys. That is the end of our book session for today. As I said before, for some of you that may be new and are just hearing the story for the first time, you can always catch up on what has been read so far on the YouTube channel. This VOD will also be making its way into the YouTube channel as well. I made sure to categorize the VOD so that way you guys know where to start watching if you are interested in hearing the story from the beginning again. But this is where we're going to end today's stream. I hope you guys enjoyed your bedtime story, and I'll see you next time on next Monday for our progression to the story. Good night, y'all, and have a good sleep. Bye-bye.